Minister Taoiseach has now indicated that he wants to speak, so Minister, you have 15 minutes.
I hope the House will agree that by speaking early it will give an opportunity for people to respond to what I've said. I also want to indicate that at about 6:15 I'm going to have to leave, but I'll be replaced by Minister Kieran Cannon. I need to fly to London this evening. But I'm very pleased to have an opportunity to address the House on this important issue. And at the outset, can I express my appreciation also to Senators for rescheduling this debate to allow me to be present today. Senator Black and her colleagues have put some very important issues on the agenda, and I really wanted to be here to speak to them. I also want to recognise the presence and welcome the presence of the Palestinian ambassador here, and indeed Dr. Barghouti, who I've had the opportunity to meet and talk to on a number of occasions now. I'd like also to pay tribute to the considerable work and the sincere commitment which has gone into developing this bill from a number of different sources. From my discussions with Senator Black, I know that it's been put forward in a spirit of wishing to contribute to the well-being of the Palestinian people, and from a desire to bring an end to the construction of settlements on land in the occupied Palestinian territory, beyond Israel's international recognised border. These are objectives which I and the Government fully share. I know they're also shared by Fianna Fáil, and I have discussed this bill in depth with that party's spokesperson for Foreign Affairs, Darragh O'Brien, on more than one occasion, and indeed the Leader in the Seanad today also. The relentless expansion of Israeli settlements on Palestinian territory is unjust, it's provocative, and it undermines the credibility of Israel's commitment to a peaceful solution to a conflict that we all want an end to. The introduction and settlement of communities of an occupying power to alter the demography of an area is unambiguously illegal under international law. The process of establishing settlements also inevitably involves violations of the rights of the occupied population through seizure of their land, demolitions, discriminatory treatment, including unequal implementation of planning laws, and other restrictions, including on movement. The Government has consistently and repeatedly condemned the construction and expansion of settlements. We have conveyed these concerns to the Israeli authorities at the highest level and highlighted them in our interventions at EU, UN and in other international fora. We have also stated clearly to Israel that we believe that settlements are unjust and do untold damage. I raised Ireland's concerns about settlements directly with the Israeli authorities during my visits to Israel and Palestine in July of last year and also a few weeks ago. It's not a coincidence that in the first 5 months of being or first 6 months of being Minister for Foreign Affairs, I've chosen to go to Israel and Palestine twice. I've met the Israeli Prime Minister 3 times. I've had the pleasure of meeting the Palestinian President twice, and indeed his Foreign Minister, Minister Maliki, on multiple occasions. So this is an issue that I'm interested in, and I want Ireland to play a constructive role in helping to find political solutions. I also condemned Israel's recent announcement of plans for further settlement units in the West Bank in a statement on the 12th of January. I know that our concerns on these issues are shared by many Israelis also, and I think that Senator Norris reminded us of that today in the letter that he quoted from. Settlements are deeply damaging to the prospects of a peace agreement and are undermining the very basis of a two-state solution, which is, of course, the only solution that Ireland supports and indeed the EU supports as a collective. I have been very clear to Israeli and US interlocutors, as well as within the EU, that settlement construction is an obstacle to the successful peace process that both have stated they want to see. It is extremely difficult for both sides to engage in good faith negotiations if, as they are talking, one side is quite literally pouring concrete on the space for negotiation. And that is the impact of settlements. While people dream about a future for themselves in terms of an independent state of Palestine. They are physically seeing their future neighbour pouring concrete on land that they see as their own. And that is why it has such a corrosive impact on the relationship between both communities, and of course why it creates such political tension. And that is why we have repeatedly made this an issue, whether that be in the UN, in New York last September, or whether it be in conversations that we have in Ramallah or in Jerusalem. Prime Minister Netanyahu has told me that he is committed to negotiations, and I believe him, although I suspect there are some in this House that don't. I also know how committed President Abbas is to a path for peace and to securing a positive outcome for his people through peaceful negotiation. He wouldn't continue to pursue that objective, given the history that he has had and had to manage in the context of occupation, if he wasn't committed to that. But I also know that for more than 20 years after the Oslo Accords, he finds it hard to persuade his people to continue to hope and to continue to trust that the establishment of the long-sought Palestinian state is near. Settlement construction is consistently undercutting Palestinians' hope for the future and has an undermining impact on a belief that political negotiation can deliver on the hopes of Palestinian people. Before I say a word about this bill, I would like to say a few words about what it is not. This bill does not propose a boycott of Israel. Successive Irish governments have opposed boycotts of Israel, and I strongly disagree with those activists advocating a policy of BDS. I firmly believe that such an approach is counterproductive and that it would not help to increase understanding in Israel of why the international community has such a concern about occupation. There are many countries around the world about which we have serious human rights concerns, but we do not seek to prevent trade with those countries except in very rare circumstances in accordance with decisions at EU or UN level. But I also think it's important to put on the record, as I have done before, that I believe that activists are entitled to advocate for a non-violent political viewpoint as a matter of freedom of speech in the context of the work that many NGOs do. I have said this bill does not propose measures against Israel. I know that a lot of careful work has been done to craft a bill which relates to occupied territories only, and which does not aim to impact on Israel itself within its internationally recognised borders. This is an important point for me, but despite that, the government is going to oppose this bill, and I want to outline the reasons why. Ireland has supported and will continue to support action at EU level which differentiates between settlements and Israel. I believe that Ireland and the EU should have good relations with Israel, a country with which we have much in common, but a country with which we also have disagreements right now. We have an extraordinary shared history, a very tragic one, that I think should remind us of the need to work together. Before I move on to the political issues raised by this bill, I do want to say a word about the legal aspects, because that has been mentioned. Issues of international trade fall under the common commercial policy of the EU. Under Article 3 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, the common commercial policy is an exclusive competence of the Union. I have heard the argument today, and indeed before today, that a public policy exception could apply to this bill. However, I am advised that this argument is not well founded, and that the Court of Justice of the European Union interprets such unilateral restrictions on trade imposed by Member States very narrowly. While all EU Member States oppose settlements, and many feel as strongly as Ireland, the legal position is that no such Member State has yet taken the step to take action on a national basis on this issue. I know that that's what this bill is proposing, that Ireland would be the first to do. There are also a number of other legal concerns which have been flagged to me in this bill. However, rather than going through these in depth, I would like to focus this evening on the political question of how Ireland can best use its influence on the Middle East peace process for the good of Palestinians and Israelis. If a way around the legal and practical challenges were found and the bill were adopted, the impact on settlements, in my view, would be minimal. However, the cost to Ireland's ability to influence the Middle East peace process in a positive way, in my view, could be significant, particularly at this time, given the amount of time and effort that we have put into building relationships over the last 6 months. The Middle East peace process has been a priority for me personally since I took up the role of Minister for Foreign Affairs and Trade. I know those proposing this bill share my view that Ireland can play a positive role in the Middle East peace process, and I want to set out how I think we can do just that. I believe that Ireland can be a positive influence on the Middle East peace process by engaging directly with the parties. And of course that means engaging with both parties, Israelis and Palestinians, in a constructive, direct and open way. In addition to the very good relations that Irish people have with Palestinians, it is important to me that Ireland has a good relationship with Israel too. Ireland and Israel share a lot of history. The sixth President of Israel, for example, Sham Herzog, was born on the island of Ireland 100 years ago this year. I am regularly asked in the Dáil whether I have raised issues of concern with the Israeli government. And often I am able to answer that question by saying, yes, I have, and very directly. I've had a frank and open conversation with the government and Prime Minister of Israel on issues of common interest and on issues of concern. I've also listened and heard Israeli concerns about fears for the safety of their families and the security of their state in the future. This dialogue, although imperfect, currently provides valuable opportunities to raise difficult issues and to press for action towards peace, which is ultimately what we want, a negotiated peace solution with both people at the table feeling that they are being heard in terms of legitimate and fair aspirations. If adopted, the bill proposed today would, rightly or wrongly, be seen very negatively in Israel, and at a critical moment in the Middle East peace process, in my view, it would really have a result of undermining the impact that the Irish government may have in terms of our interaction directly with the Israeli government. This is indeed a critical moment for the peace process, as I've said. I have been very clear about my disappointment and disagreement, indeed, at the US announcement on Jerusalem last month. And Ireland joined 127 other member states at the UN to restate our long-held position on Jerusalem. And I think it's important to say to this House that in advance of that decision, when we understood that it was coming, I contacted directly the US Embassy here in Dublin to outline our opposition to that approach, because we knew that it would cause significant political division and polarisation, which is exactly what has happened since. But I also know the US administration does have big ambitions in the Middle East. Many have given up on this conflict, but this administration has not. And that has the potential to be positive. I believe that it is important for Ireland to engage with the US team which is preparing the Middle East Peace Initiative, and I have done that on multiple occasions, meeting the key figures involved. Ireland has a perspective to bring in advocating for a balanced and fair approach and in drawing on some of the lessons of our own peace process. I know also that the perspective amongst Palestinians has changed towards the US in the last couple of months because of the Jerusalem issue. And I think it is all the more important now that countries like Ireland and others can actually play a part in reassuring Palestinians that a peace process is possible involving the United States and also perhaps other countries as well. I am a committed multilateralist and a committed European, and I believe that Ireland has its greatest impact of all on foreign policy when we act together with others. Working with our EU partners allows us to magnify our influence. Over a period of many years, Ireland has been an important and effective voice in the EU on the Middle East peace process. Ireland's influence has been important in ensuring that the EU adheres to long-established positions, including on the two-state solution, on the acceptable parameters of that solution, and in highlighting the impact of the occupation on Palestinians. We have that influence because we are clear and we are consistent, but also because we work with others. We're not isolated, and we are not a principal voice in the wilderness, but rather part of a team working with other countries whenever we find common ground and bringing a whole EU debate forward, which is what we are trying to do now. There are a number of debates that have happened at the Foreign Affairs Council that wouldn't have happened if Ireland hadn't insisted on ensuring that the Middle East peace process was on the agenda. For example, Ireland supported action at EU level on labelling settlement goods, which was mentioned earlier, which was subsequently implemented. Acting with our EU partners, we have ensured that goods from settlements, when imported into the EU, are excluded from the low tariff rates applied to Israeli goods. I would be open to consideration of whether the EU's approach on settlement products could be tightened up further when the political climate in the EU allows for that. Reaching consensus at EU level is hard. It requires work and it requires a lot of patience. But it is worth doing because Ireland is at its most influential when we work within the EU to amplify the impact of our convictions. It can mean that policy does not always move fast, and maybe we don't get the headlines that we'd like to get. But sometimes the results of our efforts are not apparent to all. But I know how much Irish diplomatic energy has gone into achieving better, fairer, more consistent EU positions on the Middle East, and indeed on a full range of global issues, because I've been working with our team on that. Many believe that in adopting this bill, Ireland would send an important signal to the Palestinian people. And that's true. I think we would. I understand well that that signal would be well received by many. But the day after, the lives of Palestinians would probably remain the same. The memory of the signal may well fade over time, and Ireland's reputation would be as a country willing to go it alone rather than a country determined to influence, persuade and bring others with us may well be damaged. I strongly believe that Ireland can best support the Palestinian and Israeli people by remaining a strong and engaged partner on the Middle East, by continuing to exert a positive influence in the EU, and by continuing to advocate with the US administration, which I'll continue to do when I go to the US in, 3 weeks' time. It's for this reason that I have recommended that the government oppose the bill. But can I say, Deputy, that our approach on the Middle East needs to constantly be reassessed. My view at the moment, for what it's worth, and I hope my speech is clear on this, is that I believe our approach in our efforts to try to achieve a negotiated two-state solution that's fair to both sides should be focused on intensive diplomacy, on straight, blunt discussion in our efforts to try to persuade and also in our efforts to try to get a stronger, more unified position within the European Union, which is the way the European Union can really be persuasive with an Israeli government. In the meantime, of course, we will continue to support the Palestinian Authority and Palestinians generally. We currently spend about €12 million a year in terms of humanitarian assistance and supports, mainly through education. We will probably double that figure this year in relation to some of the new projects that we have agreed to work on. So we are committed. We have 85% of our peacekeepers are in this region, on the Golan Heights and in southern Lebanon. So, let's just be clear. We are a country, a small country, that is and wants to be engaged in this issue with an objective to try to get a result. And a result means a negotiated peaceful solution, not simply Ireland making a statement. While statements are important, they don't necessarily deliver outcomes that we need. In my view, for what it's worth, and I'll say this now, there was a lot of optimism last September, October, in relation to a new US initiative. And speaking to very senior Palestinian politicians, there was real hope that a new US initiative may actually move this process forward in a major way. The Jerusalem Statement has provided a huge setback, and all of us now who are interested in trying to find solutions here, in my view, need to find a way of how we create a new political engagement that can allow us to get back to where we were in September, October, expecting an initiative from a US team. The structure needs to be different now. It needs to involve other countries. But that is my focus, on trying to get that structure back, as opposed to being part of adding to the polarisation on each side of the Atlantic on this issue, where the EU is, the perception is that the EU is supporting Palestinians and the US is supporting Israelis. We need to be closing that gap, not widening it. And that is why at this time, I think that this bill will have a polarising effect rather than an effect of trying to encourage political solutions. And that is why I am open to persuasion in the future if we're getting nowhere on political engagement. But I am strongly of the view now that we need to maintain a relationship with both sides in a respectful manner, listening as well as talking. And if we do that, Ireland will remain relevant here, politically, in terms of helping to progress a new initiative which ultimately can deliver a two-state workable solution for Palestinians and Israelis. And until that happens, we're always going to be managing conflict in a way that is totally unsatisfactory and in a way that is causing such misery, particularly for Palestinians in the West Bank and in particular in Gaza. So I hope that gives a sense as to where the government is coming from on this, and I look forward to hearing more contributions.
Okay. Thank you, Minister.